So let's do it. And all of those suckers who didn't come today will have to watch the video on the YouTube. I hope that they like and subscribe and leave a comment. So I want to talk about something completely new today. Last time we finished talking about the Bonsoff and the weighted voting and all of that. That's all behind us now. And I would like to talk about the next big topic, which we're going to be on for a couple weeks, 3 weeks maybe, is also vaguely related to voting, although in a completely different context. What I want to talk about is gerrymandering. Gerrymandering. This is a big deal in American politics these days. It is not so much a big deal in other countries because we have a sort of a problem with gerrymandering in the U.S. that is caused by the way that we do local elections. And if the rules were different, and in some other countries they just don't do it the way we do, and this problem doesn't exist everywhere in the world. Anyway, let's talk about gerrymandering. Like, there are some people who will tell you that gerrymandering is like the most important thing in American politics, and that like all our problems in politics are because of gerrymandering. I actually am not personally I'm not so hardcore about it, although it is, in my opinion, super important, and it makes a big difference in a lot of different settings. So, anyway, what it's about, I don't know if you've heard of gerrymandering before. It is kind of in the news fairly often these days. It's about drawing district lines for elections. Welcome. This is about drawing district lines for elections. Typically, so we are going to talk about gerrymandering in the United States. I will say usually the discussion about gerrymandering in the U.S. is usually about Congress representative districts, congressional districts. So the way that this works, I don't know how with it you are in terms of American politics, and you don't have to be particularly knowledgeable to understand this, but there are, like, every state has representatives in the Congress depending on their population. The very small states only have one representative, and the bigger states have many, and it's basically the same as the number of electoral college votes you get, -2. But for example, the state of Connecticut has 5 congressional districts, and so that means the state of Connecticut has 5 representatives who make laws or whatever in the U.S. Congress on our behalf. And the districts, we have 5 representatives, and each of them is elected by one of the 5 districts. And in the state of Connecticut, the districts, this is vaguely the shape of Connecticut, and the districts are something like, I'm going to show you a real picture in a moment, but just for the sake of discussion for now, the districts go something like that in Connecticut. I don't know if you are aware or care about this, but they have numbers, and I believe we are in district number 4. Fairfield is like around here somewhere on this picture. And our district number 4, anybody happen to know the current representative from our district? I don't know if you're into the local Connecticut politics. We are currently, District 4 is represented by Mr. Jim Himes. Yeah, I don't know much about Jim Himes. I follow him on Twitter, but he doesn't tweet much. I know Jim Himes makes his own honey. He has bees that he owns. Anyway, Jim Himes is a Democrat. And each of the 5 districts elects somebody to be their representative. And gerrymandering is about drawing the district lines. That's all that it's about. These lines, where do they go? Who decided where they go? And what difference does it make? All right. They are, those lines have to go somewhere. But how do we decide where exactly the lines go? And does it make any real difference anyway? The answer is yes, actually. It makes a big difference precisely where the lines are drawn. How do we decide where the lines are drawn? All right. Actually, it matters like far more than you might expect it to matter. And this is what the whole kind of discussion about gerrymandering is all about. This. How do we decide where the lines are drawn? So this next couple weeks, is very much about, it's still about voting, kind of. But really, this is a much more geometric kind of thing. We're going to have a lot of pictures and drawing pictures of things rather than just like counting up numbers. And you can see I got a stack of handouts, although I didn't need the stack to be as big as it is. So anyway, let's just talk about the basic issues behind gerrymandering. In the state of Connecticut, all of American politics is dominated by the two parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. And in the state of Connecticut, if you just look at like the total population, how many Democrats versus Republicans there are, if you look, for example, based on voting in the previous presidential elections, in Connecticut, the population is about 65% Democrat, 35% Republican. And Connecticut, like on the national level, Connecticut is regarded as a solid Democratic state because it's 65%. It's sort of like a 2-to-1 ratio in terms of if you just meet random people in Connecticut, they're sort of 2-to-1 likely that they are Democrats. That doesn't mean everyone in Connecticut is a Democrat. It means, 2/3 or so. Anyway, in Connecticut, you have about 2/3 of the people are Democrats. Now, we have 5 districts. The District 4 is Democratic. But based on this population, how many Democratic versus Republican districts, or can I say representatives, should we have? Should Connecticut have? There's 5 of them, right? And there has to be 5 of them. Why Connecticut has 5 is according to some formula which is described in the Constitution about how do you figure out how many representatives you get. It's based on population, and that formula determines that Connecticut has 5 representatives. Now, if in the state of Connecticut about 2/3 of the people are Democrat and 1/3 are Republican, how many D versus R representatives should Connecticut have? I would say, maybe like 3D and 2R. This is a little generous to the R's. That would be 60% versus 40%. That's not generous. Yeah, that's a little bit less than the true ratio, right? Or maybe just according to how the numbers work out. Maybe it should be 4 D's and 1 R. That would be 80% Democrat, 20% Republican, which would be sort of favoring the Democrats, but it has to be something like that in order to match up properly with the population. This would be, I would say, maybe those would be fair in terms of how many Democrats and Republicans actually live in Connecticut. All right. Anybody happen to know what the actual breakdown is in Connecticut? How many representatives are the D's versus the R's? You guys apparently are not addicted to politics, which is good in my opinion. The answer is 5-0. In the state of Connecticut, all of the representatives are Democrats. None are Republicans. So in the state of Connecticut, the reps, let me just say, all 5 representatives are D's, 0 R's. All right? This, in my opinion, there's something weird about that, all right? I would say somehow this is not fair. I'm not saying somebody is cheating or anything like that. It's just like the rules of how we do this, though, do not ensure any kind of fairness in this regard. All right, so let me just put it another way. Remember, 35% of the people are Republicans, but 0% of the representatives are Republicans. All right, this, in my opinion, there's something not right about that, or maybe at least like uncomfortable about that, right? It's counterintuitive, and it seems like the Republicans are getting screwed here. Why is that the case? Well, can anybody got an idea? How could it be that 35% of the people are Republicans, but they end up with nothing when it comes to the districts? Yeah.
Maybe because in each district there's voted one representative, and for example, like maybe there in each district is 60% Democrats and 30% Republican, and then every time the Democrat wins against the Republican, and therefore in each district is the representative the Democrat.
Yeah, right. I think this is exactly what I was going to say. The fact is, in the state overall, there's about 65% Democrats and 35% Republicans. And actually, that same breakdown roughly exists in all 5 districts. And so, in each of these districts, if there's 65% Democrat, then the Democrats will win every time. And so the representation looks skewed because the D's, so let me just say, in every district, the Democrats have a majority. And so they win every time. And this is not necessarily unfair. It leads to a result that's kind of weird, but it is true that in every district the Democrats have a majority. This is one aspect of what people sometimes call the tyranny of the majority. This is what I mentioned before about if you use randomness, that can fix issues like this. But of course, nobody would ever want to elect Congress people at random. But it is a fact. In every district, the Democrats have a majority, and so they win every time. You might say the problem for the R's, the problem for the Republicans is that it's not that there aren't enough of them, because actually there are enough of them to deserve at least one of those representatives. The problem is they are geographically dispersed, right? They don't all live together. If they were all living like in a clump somewhere, they might be able to win that district, but they're just not. And so for that reason, they don't accumulate any votes. They don't ever accumulate enough votes to win any one of the districts. All right. The problem really here is that these districts are done according to where people live. And if people are more or less evenly spread out, then that just kind of gives a lopsided result just because of the way that we do things according to where people live. So like I said, this problem it exists in American politics, but it doesn't exist everywhere because there are some places where they don't elect representatives according to geographic districts. If you don't do that, then none of this is a problem at all. But we do it this way in terms of geographic districts, and so it causes issues in terms of representation. We could say the United States of America does not have, here's another sort of political buzzword, proportional representation. Proportional representation. Proportional representation would mean if, 10% of the people are Republicans, then the Republicans should get 10% of the representatives. And that seems fair to me. That is kind of a fantasy in the United States. It doesn't work that way. although it would be great if it did. There are many places in the world where they require, like the Constitution says, every time you do voting, you must have proportional representation, and that makes this kind of problem impossible in some other countries. But in the U.S., we don't care about that, apparently. That's not part of the Constitution, and for that reason, we end up with weird situations involving drawing districts, all right? And the moral of the story, what I want to convince you of today, is where you draw the lines makes a huge difference. I wanted to look specifically at Connecticut. Now I got a real picture here. This is not something you can easily copy down into your notes, but I hope you can. It's not all that complicated either. So this is a diagram of the true district lines in Connecticut. Those 5 districts. So we are down here somewhere. And then the other 5. The actual lines are pretty weird, these sort of blocky things. The reason they have these jagged edges around them is because they're trying to follow along borders of towns, and the individual towns are arranged in a weird way. So those are this is the actual districts that exist in the state of Connecticut. I would like to draw your attention to one especially weird feature which my eye is drawn to, and that is this weird sort of hammerhead type thing. This is district number 5 over here, and this up here is district number 1, this one. And you can see number 5 has this like hammerhead intrusion into number 1. And then number 1 has this sort of, like this part here is kind of encroaching over this way. When I'm looking at that, I feel like that's a pretty weird, those are weird shapes and weird lines. Wouldn't it be a little nicer if, how about this, I could say cut it off maybe right here. I'm gonna scribble this one red. I would say the lines look more natural if we swap, like give the blue one to number 1 and give the red one to number 5. Then number 5 looks like a much more ordinary shape, and number 1 also looks like a much more ordinary shape. And I counted it up, actually, those towns, that's a trade of an equal number of towns, okay? Looks more natural if we give the red to number 5. Welcome. I was beginning to think you weren't coming along with everybody else.
I had to get lunch before the Tully closed. Tully closed at 2.
Really? You can't have dinner here today?
No.
They're just shoving you out.
At 6:30.
All right.
Like hard line. They're like GTFO.
Yeah. Anyway, the lines, the regions here would look more natural if we gave the red one to District 5 and the blue one to District 1. All right. So why don't they do that? Wouldn't it be nice if the lines were arranged more nicely? It turns out if you were to do that, this will put a greater concentration of Republicans into District 5, and District 5 would actually be able to get a Republican representative. So if you do this swap, it's an even swap in terms of the number of towns I'm moving from one to another. If we do that, so if we swap it like that, then number 5 will be majority Republican. All right. So why don't they do that? Because the Democrats are in charge. That's why they don't do that. This is one way. So, and this is the basic idea behind gerrymandering is, how do you win an election in the United States? One way is to actually be better than your opponent and convince people to like you more. Another way is to mess around with the district lines in a way that makes you win and the other people lose. All right? So if we were to swap it, the picture gets nicer actually, but that would cause number 5 to flip to being Republican. And in the state of Connecticut, the D's are already in power, and so this would not be allowed to happen. If a Republican said, hey, we should change the map, Governor Ned Lamont of the Democratic Party would say, no, we're not going to do that. So the D's are already in power. So they keep the map in a state which is advantageous to them, which it is currently. So they keep the map like this to get an advantage. All right. This is the basic idea behind gerrymandering. So the moral of the story is you can swing election results by redrawing the maps. Now, it's natural in the state of Connecticut, it's natural to look at the map as we are currently using it and say, maybe this whole thing was just a scam by the Democrats all along. Maybe the map we're using was actually created in order to give an advantage to the Democrats, and that's why we have that map. Now, in the case of the state of Connecticut, I believe that that's not really the case. You can look back deeper back in history. You know, Connecticut right now is a reliably Democratic state, but it has not always been that way. But we've been using the same lines on the map for a very long time, even before the Democrats were dominating in this state. So it's not, I believe there's no real historical evidence that the Democrats have purposely made the map in order to be unfair. But they certainly like it the way it is, and they're not going to change it. Yeah.
But in general, isn't it like then a problem because like it doesn't matter like if it's now Democrat or Republic, but this system doesn't represent the actual percentage of people who want to who have like one position. So wouldn't it make more sense, for example, to like let Republic and Democrat the representatives, but maybe the Democrat gets like more power or something?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, if your question begins with, wouldn't it make more sense? The answer is often yes, but they're never going to do that. So I would say it would make sense to just get rid of this entire system and redesign something which actually is more representative of the people. But they're not going to do that. Yeah, it's I think part of the big problem is the maps, organizing the maps comes down to whoever is in charge gets to say what the map is. And so whoever's in charge is just going to use the map to give themselves more power and not to the others. Yeah, it's a problem which, you know, there are ways, like I said, in other countries this is not an issue because they structure their voting differently, but it is an issue here, and it's not there's not a lot of appetite for just totally restructuring the whole system. All right, yeah, that's a great question. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, so I was saying in the state of Connecticut, there's actually not a lot of evidence that the map has been purposefully drawn to benefit the Democrats, although it does benefit the Democrats, and so they are purposefully keeping it the way it is. But in many other states, there is clear evidence that the map has been purposefully drawn in order to achieve certain outcomes. So that's really what we're going to be focusing on. The state of Connecticut is not a very egregious example of this. Other states have very sort of blatantly unfair maps. Anyway, this is all referred to as gerrymandering. That word refers to drawing the maps to achieve some kind of partisan advantage. One thing you might wonder is, why don't we just like never redraw the maps? How about like the entire nation somehow decides on a fair map once, and you just leave it that way forever? And if population shift, people move around, then, you know, tough luck. The map is what it is. That's kind of how we do it with like the states. The boundaries between the states don't move. They are what they are. And anybody know, by the way, why don't we just draw the map once and leave it that way forever?
Maybe because, for example, also like the number of inhabitants change all the time.
Yeah, that's the problem. You know, I said Connecticut has 5 districts is because of the population of the state of Connecticut. If the state of Connecticut increased its population and like Massachusetts decreased its population, then Connecticut would go up to 6 and Massachusetts would go down to whatever. And then automatically Connecticut would have to create a new map. And so you cannot just fix the district lines forever, because they must be redrawn every so often. It hasn't happened in a long time in Connecticut because apparently our population has been fairly stable, but you know, it happens. Every time they do a US census, some of the states must redraw their districts because some gain and some lose. All right, this is called gerrymandering. Oh, I thought I would show you, like, this is a weird word. This is named after a politician named, I believe this guy's name was Gerry. This was his last name, who was the Massachusetts governor in 1812. And he was one of the first people to try to do this kind of thing, to draw a ridiculous map in order to gain an advantage for his party. And I happen to have a picture of Elbridge Gerry's original district. It's that red thing in the state of Massachusetts. That somewhat ridiculous shape was somehow Gerry figured out that if that were one of the districts, that would allow his party to do better. And this was like, the word gerrymander was meant as like an insult, that because people said this is a ridiculous shape, and it looks, apparently somebody said it looks kind of like a salamander, and they were like, yeah, more like gerrymander, am I right? And it was really hilarious. And that's anyway, that's where the word comes from, gerrymander. It's just a weird shape on the picture. Okay, so I would like to talk about 2 major topics for discussion that we're going to be discussing over the next few weeks. One is how to rig an election by gerrymandering. I would like to talk about what are the strategies that the people use to draw the maps in an unfair way. You know, I think that this is bad for society in general. So I'm not trying to give you evil tools here, but this is more like you got to understand the opponent, right? I want to understand how it is that people do this in order to subvert ordinary democracy, ordinary representation. And then secondly, and this is a little bit more important, the second question in terms of improving our society, how to detect if maps are unfair. This is something that is very important these days. You know, people draw unfair maps all the time, and usually these have to be, they are contested usually by courts, because the maps are typically drawn by whatever party is in power in each state. And if you want to challenge that, you are basically having to challenge the governor of the state often, and the way to do that is by suing them in a court. And the court is supposed to be politically neutral. So when you want to sue somebody and say the map is unfair, the way the discussion always goes is, I think the map is unfair, and then they say, no, it's not unfair. I just drew it. I don't know why I put the crazy shapes in there. I just made the map. You need some kind of specific measurement that demonstrates that the map is unfair according to this and this, principle. All right. So this is really how to detect. This is really like mathematical measurements. And there are several different specific ways that you can look at a map and measure, for instance, how weird are the shapes. You can't just say, yeah, that shape looks kind of weird to me. There are actually mathematically sophisticated ways to measure how weird a shape is. And then also not just weird shapes, but also detecting skewed representation by other kinds of statistical measurements. So that's what we're going to talk about in the second part. Although today we are going to talk mostly about the first question. I hope that this sounds interesting to some people. And if not, it'll only take a few weeks, right? What I have here is I would like to try to draw some districts on a sample map. And I have a handout here. This is a very sort of abstract, simplified map. It doesn't look like a real map. We're going to look at some real maps eventually, but this is good enough for us for now. So what you see here are a bunch of squares. Some are light and some are dark, and I have one of these on here. All right, this is our map. All right, we have, if you count them up here, there are 50 squares, and 20 of them are dark. I'm going to call those the D's, and 30 are light. I'll call those the L's. All right, so you should imagine that these represent two political parties, the darks and the lights. All right, and they live in those locations. So think of this as maybe these are city blocks or something. This is where the people live. 20 of them are the darks, and 30 of them are the lights. And I would like to say, let's make 5 districts of 10 people each. And I'm going to do that by drawing boundary lines within this grid, all right? And I would like to know what could the results possibly look like. So I'm going to do one example first. How about, and see if you can draw this along with me. Unfortunately, you have to make sure you draw it the same way that I do. I am going to make one district here. Just all those. I want 5 districts of 10 people each, all right? So I'm going to call this district number 1. My number 2, I'm going to make the same, just right under it. I'm going to make number 3 is a little more interesting shaped. Ooh, sorry. Like so. That's number 3. And then I have number 4 is here. And 5 is these guys. All right. So I drew the lines in that particular way. Now, according to these lines, what will the representatives be? So within each of those 5 regions, I'm just going to count up. Now, I did this carefully so that I do indeed have 5 districts of 10 people each. And within each of those, I can count up who's, how many darks versus lights. So I have number 1 looks like 6 light and 4 dark. So the L wins in District 1, all right? And we're just gonna count up for each of them. In number 2, I have, again, 6 light and 4 dark. Number 2 and 1 are basically the same arrangements. So here the L's win again. Number 3, we have 2 darks and 8 light. So the lights win again. Number 4, this is all light, 0 dark. So this is the L's. And then number 5 is all dark. So this is 0 light, 10 dark. And the D's win. All right. So for this particular map that I drew, the results are 4L, 1D, right? That is the overall district results. Come on now. 4 of those districts were won by the light party and 1 by the dark, right? I would like you all to check this out, look carefully, and I would like to see if you can, like I gave you many copies of this same picture, see if you can draw the boundary lines in another way, which leads to a different outcome, all right? So this is the outcome that I got from my particular arrangement, 4 light districts, 1 dark districts. I would like to know, can you get, by drawing them in some other way, can you get other outcomes? I suppose if I were to make like a master list of all, even in theory, it could go 5 light, 0 dark, just because I'm making 5 total, right? It could go 4 light, 1 dark. That's actually the one that I just did. I did this. It could go 3 light, 2 dark. These are just all the possibilities. 2 light, 3 dark. That would be especially weird because the darks, there's more light voters than dark voters. Could you actually make the results lopsided? Maybe. And then I suppose 0 lights and 5 darks. Now probably some of these are not even possible at all, but I would like you to see what you can do, play around with it on the map, see what different kinds of outcomes you can get. I already got this one, but which other ones are possible? Maybe some are impossible, but see what you think. Remember, you need to divide it into 5 groups of 10 voters each. And try to make it so that there are no ties on the inside an individual district, just because I don't want to deal with ties. I'll give you a few minutes. I'll come around and see how you're doing.
Could you scroll back up for a second?
Yes.
I just
Mm-hmm.
Since you need 6 votes to win 10 of the ties, the 4 dark members is impossible, right? Right.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we're going to talk about figuring that out. All right. Get any interesting?
I think I have 3 light and 2 dark.
Okay. Great. How's it going? Good. You got all or nothing? Yep. Good. Okay. All right. Getting anything? Maybe. This one actually is impossible.
This isn't.
It is impossible. It's not. Mm-hmm. I'll give you another moment, then we can talk about these.
Is it possible to make the dark ones win?
Win. What do you mean by win?
I just realized, like you divided it up into 5 groups, and the light categories won 4 of them, but the darks won 1 of them.
Yes.
Is it possible to make the darks win all 5, but the lights win 1 of them?
I think that is not possible, although we need to.
I was
Yeah, we're gonna discuss how you might be able to tell what is and what isn't possible. Maybe let's just chat about these. So I did the 4 lights and the 1 dark. I saw some people do the 5 lights and the 0 darks in a very simple way. Can anyone describe how would you draw them? I didn't understand that gesture. Were you gonna?
Just every time the first 2 rows, because every time it's 6 to 4.
Yeah, right. If you just take horizontal rows, is that what you meant by?
I meant something much stupider. I just
Oh, okay.
meant, like, have the whole thing be a voter base and light wins.
Yes. Yeah, you're not allowed to do that. So what we are trying to do every time here is make 5 districts of 10 voters each. So yeah, you can't just choose the whole thing and say it's just one giant district. Yeah, what she said, if you just make like horizontal bars of these like so, then you get, then the lights will win every time, right? So this arrangement here has 5 lights, 0 darks as the outcome. All right. So that first one there, 5 lights and no darks, that is possible. I did 4 lights and 1 dark. 3 light and 2 dark. There's actually a similar kind of cute way to arrange the districts to make 3 lights and 2 darks. Did anybody think of a cute way to do it?
Each column.
Yeah, if you just draw them vertically, in this case, then actually every district will be unanimous. And you will get 2 dark districts and 3 light districts. So that one is also possible. This is very weird. If I saw this in a real life map, I would suggest that somebody was trying to play some funny business. If you made all the districts into very long, thin strips, it's really strange. But at least, mathematically, it is possible to make that. So this is 3 lights, 2 darks, right? There are less cute ways. As I was walking around, I saw some people you can make this outcome with a much more ordinary looking set of districts. What about this one, 2 lights and 3 darks? Like I said, this is a fairly weird outcome because it involves more districts for the dark voters, even though there are more light voters than there are dark voters. Somebody arranged it in this way? Yeah, can you describe somehow how you did it?
I just counted first like 6 squares with the dark ones.
Mm-hmm.
They win, automatically win, and then just add for 4 more.
Yeah, this is a great way of thinking about it. So the outcome here is going to be 2 lights and 3 darks, and I think what she said is, first of all, you got to keep in mind, in order to win each district. To win a district, the D's need 6, right? So we're going to draw our first district with 6 darks and then maybe these 4 light ones. I don't know if that's exactly how you did it, but something like that. All right? This now is a district which is going to go to the darks. Can we make the darks win another one? Well, yeah, we can make another one which has 6 darks and 4 lights in it. So how about the next 6 and then just grab 4 other ones? This one also will be won by the darks, all right? So I'm gonna try and write some commentary over here. To win a district, the D's need 6, I would say 6, 6, yeah, that was clear enough. Yeah? You feeling it now? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give them 6 every time to guarantee, like, they could win 3 of them if I give them another 6 right here. And now I'll just divide up the rest evenly. It doesn't really matter. And I'll let the lights win the other 2.
You can
Yeah.
also do 7 and 3. I also did one that was D majority, and like one of the lines was, so I took the bottom row, which is the 3 and the 2, that, and then went 7 up for the D, and then that was a district.
Yeah, I made it so that these D's have 6 each, although I've already got my 3 D districts and I still have 2 left over. So actually it's possible you could even make this one have 8 D's in it and it would still work out. But the way to think this through, to win a district, the D's need 6. So you need to specifically, this is a little strategy here, specifically build 3 districts to have 6 D's each. That was my strategy. I think that's what she said was her strategy to begin with. All right. I specifically made those 3 to have 6 D's each. And then really whatever else you do, it doesn't matter because the lights are going to win the rest. And then I'll just say give the rest to the L's, right? So I'm just going to more or less at random divide the rest up. Just make sure you have 10 in each district. So 5 across the bottom, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So something like that. A little snakety snake, and then this thing here. All right, so this is a L, this is a L. All right. You can see in order to achieve, like I said before, in my opinion, this is somewhat of a weird outcome because in this population there are more L's than there are D's, person by person, but we have the D's winning more. In order to achieve that kind of weird outcome, you're usually going to have to use some weird shapes, which is why in the real world that's how it works. They use crazy shapes in order to achieve weird outcomes. All right. Specifically build 3 districts to have 6 D's each and give the rest to the L's. Great. So this is 2 L's and 3 D's. What about, can we do 1 L and 4 D's? As I was walking around, it seemed like people had decided that's probably going to be impossible. Actually, if you think of it in the same way as this here, this will allow you to explain precisely why. Can anybody say, based on this reasoning here, why is 4 D's impossible? It has to do with this sort of, you need 6 to win is the idea. Yeah?
We need 24 total darks to win 4 districts.
Yeah, right. So we need, this is an important thing to keep in mind. We need 6 voters to win a district. So if you want to get 4 D's, that would require a total of at least 24 D's. That would be 4 times 6, right? So we need 6 voters to win a district. For 4 D wins, this requires at least, this would be 4 times 6, which is 24 D voters. But we don't have that many, right? I mean, you can count them up yourself, or I just told you at the beginning, there are 20 D voters. That means there are not enough, no matter how you draw the lines, there will never be enough to get 4 D districts, all right? So this would require at least 24 D voters, but I'll just say we only have 20 D voters. So the D's cannot win 4 districts. And certainly they can't win 5 districts either, right? That's even more impossible for the D's to win all 5 of them. All right? So this is how you know what are the possible outcomes. You think about how many do we need to win per district, and then how many do we actually have, and that will allow you to figure out how many possible districts, like in theory, you could win. And in this example, so in this case, 4D, 1L, and 5D, 0L are impossible. And this is what, like a typical homework problem or one of our test question about this sort of thing. I will give you a map like that one, that grid, and say, first of all, tell me which outcomes are possible, which outcomes are impossible, and then for the possible ones, draw them in, and for the impossible ones, explain why they're impossible. That's what a typical question would look like. And I got, you'll see that on the homework for next week. All right. Any questions about that? We're going to do a lot more examples, but
Do you mean 2 weeks from
yeah,
now? Okay.
Yeah.
It's just,
right. It's not due during the break. Yeah. All right.
in case that was the case, I just wanted to make sure.
Yes. I'm not sure actually if I'm allowed to make things due during the break. I don't know. I've never tried it. What are they going to do? I got tenure. I can do whatever I want. But yeah, it's not due during the break. All right. I thought it would be, I want to do some more examples, but before that, I thought it would be interesting to look at some real world examples in like, modern politics, real examples of gerrymandering. I have a bunch of pictures to show you of actual gerrymandering that exists right now in the United States. The first one, so I already showed you the original gerrymander district from Massachusetts. Nowadays, things are quite a bit more sophisticated. The people, the nefarious actors who are trying to scam elections by drawing weird maps are using computers to do it, and they are very sophisticated techniques which are available to the scammers. One that I would like to look at is the state of Maryland. Here is a map of the state of Maryland. Maryland as a state has a weird shape to begin with, but these are the districts in the state of Maryland. Now this map was challenged in court because it was believed to be unfair. This map was kind of famous for a long time as being an egregious example of unfair district lines that was drawn by Democrats. So this is a Democrat map. And just like this year, I believe, no, last year, I wrote it down. In April 2022, this was ruled illegal, and so now this is no longer the map which is in use in the state of Maryland. Last year, at that time, I don't know, I don't follow Maryland, but the governor of the state was a Republican, and the Republican governor sort of made them change the map. Although this was regarded for a long time as unfair. So this, anyway, this is a Democratic map recently replaced with a more fair one. But just look at the insane, the way that those lines go is truly ridiculous. And these lines have been specifically drawn to destabilize Republicans who live in those areas. Baltimore, as a city, is mostly Democratic, just like most big cities in the United States are typically urban people tend to be Democrats and rural people in the country tend to be Republicans. That's typically how it goes. Annapolis is a major military town, and actually there are a lot of Republicans that live around Annapolis. But these weird, crazy lines were drawn in order to basically take a large population of Republicans in that area and sort of cut them apart and divide them into these two regions. This region stretches out over here, and this one stretches way down here. And they basically took what used to be a big Republican population here and split them up into sort of two smaller halves, which could then be watered down with Democrats in these other two areas. And similar tricks were done in near Baltimore. So that's the old one. I'll show you the new one that they have just replaced it with. Looks like this. So the colors here indicate sort of the margin of victory for the different parties. What it was before is this region out here was a solid Republican area, and then everything else was solid Democrat. What you have now, and this, first of all, the shapes are much less crazy. These are much more ordinary looking shapes. And what you have is basically 4 very solid Democrat regions. These two are slightly but still reliably Democrat. And then this one over here is kind of a toss-up. So it is, for the first time in a long time, it seems like the Republicans might actually win 2 districts in Maryland, which they have not been able to do for a very long time because of this, what is widely regarded as an unfair map. All right. This is an unfair map which benefits the Democrats. It turns out if you look across the country as a whole, there's actually much more common for the maps to benefit the Republicans because the Republicans have been running this kind of districting strategy for longer than the Democrats have been doing. And they put a lot of money into researching how to do this better, this districting. I want to show you another picture This is in the state of Texas. Here we have, you can see very clearly here this sort of general principle that I said before about how cities tend to be Democratic and the country tends to be Republican. The country, I mean like outside of cities. What you have here is Houston, Austin, and San Antonio, which is those are the Democratic cities, and then everybody else is this sort of sea of Republicans that live outside of the cities. You can see this, in my opinion, is a pretty egregious bit of funny business. What they've done here is, check out, this is a common strategy that was done near Austin. Now, Austin is regarded as a very liberal area that is mostly Democratic. Basically, everybody who lives around here is going to be a Democrat, but this whole region has been cracked up. This is the terminology that's used. Look at this. They took some of those pesky Democrats near Austin, and they joined them by this ridiculous little snake into this giant region over here, which is where a bunch of Republicans live. And then this part of Austin has been joined into this huge area over here. This part of Austin joins up with this huge area. What they did was they took one district. Actually, this probably could have been like 2 or 3 districts on its own, which would have been all Democratic. They chopped it up into like 7 districts, and each one of them has been joined into Republicans that are very far away. And then they let the Democrats have one district, but they took that district and stretched it all the way over to pick up some of the Democrats from San Antonio also. This is they were really getting greedy, in my opinion, with this thing here. That means some of these people near San Antonio who might have been another Democrat district, they actually got joined into this one over here.
Is
Yeah.
the rule that each voting district needs to be continuous? Like, you can't just have 2 circles and just define them, oh, it's the same district.
Yeah, right. So yeah, I believe in every state, all of the districts, the word is connected. They have to be connected. But there's even more funny business with that because, for example, districts have to be connected, but of course, states which are on the coast have little islands, and those islands can't just be a district by themselves, but they also can't be connected. So the rule is you can make a district which is connected through water, so that's allowed. But then you can get ridiculous things like if there's a coastline here, you can make a crazy district like this and say those are connected by water. So there are funny games that you can still play with that. But generally speaking, the districts have to be connected. They can't be in 2 separate chunks. All right. Check out Houston. Actually, Houston, in my opinion, looks a little bit more fair. What you have is basically everyone in this area is Democratic, and they have actually divided this up into several Democratic districts. So to me, this, I don't know anything about Texas politics, but this to me looks more fair than certainly than Austin, which to me looks very unfair. All right. One thing I would like to point out that's interesting about Houston, I would like to draw your attention to this district here. This is a pretty weird shaped thing. This stuff, and then it has this little corridor here, and then comes down here a little bit. That district is, I believe, currently represented by Mr. Dan Crenshaw. He's a Republican. He's the guy with the eye patch. I don't know if you are aware of these kinds of guys, but that's Dan Crenshaw's district. Although I think, did he lose in the last election? I don't remember. It was his district. I don't follow him all that closely. I would like to point out, what I said about generally speaking, people in the big cities are Democrat, people in the country are Republicans. That's true. Another thing that is true is, generally speaking, people who live in the country are white, and people who live in the cities, like the cities are where the people of color tend to live. All right. So every time actually I say country versus city, I could also be talking about white versus non-white. And that is, that sort of raises another uncomfortable angle on this whole subject. I would like to look at, this is that same district, that Dan Crenshaw district or whoever it is, But this time the colors represent majority race in each little area of the city, all right? And you can see this district, which is basically owned by the Republicans, this line right here goes right along where the white people live. The blue is white people, the yellow is, I don't know, the key is down here. Hispanic and black are the yellow and green, all right? So what you have here is people are drawing the lines in order to win the election. But the result of that often is districts which are purposefully racially segregated. Now, I'm not saying that Dan Crenshaw purposefully wanted to exclude black people from his district, although that's what happened. He would say, I'm not trying to exclude black people, I'm trying to exclude people who aren't going to vote for me. But that's the same thing. So what I'm trying to point out is when people are playing sort of these funny games to win elections, they're playing some kind of rat race, which actually is involved with racial politics. Like very fundamentally, all of the controversy about gerrymandering has a fundamental racial angle to it. And people who people who are playing these games will tell you, no, I'm not being racial, I'm just trying to win the election. But this is, to me, this is a very good example of what they call systemic racism. That is to say, racism which is expressed through laws and rules, not about like people who hate black people deep down in their heart. That's not what this is about. I mean, I don't know the state of Dan Crenshaw's heart. I just know that his district lines are drawn right where the black people live, right? This is what they call, this is the kind of thing that they call systemic racism. That is, it's not about how people feel about race, it's about what are you doing and the laws that you are making. You don't have to feel it in your heart to have harmful effects. All right. So this just a little. I think that's interesting. I should say I am not an expert in politics, and I'm also not an expert in the politics of race specifically. So I think it's interesting, and I do think as a white gentleman, I think it is somewhat my responsibility to try to understand a little bit about this kind of stuff, although I'm not an expert. One last thing to say about that. I got one more real-world example. That thing in Texas, that is the current map. Here is one more. What? Sorry, I lost it. I can draw the picture if I know. No, it's not in here. All right, sorry about that. This is an example in Chicago. It's a simple enough picture that I can just draw it. This is not about the United States. No, it is about the United States representatives. So in Chicago is a very democratic city. It is also not coincidentally a city where a lot of people of color live. In Chicago, there are, I'm not an expert about Chicago. This is Illinois District number 4. The city of Chicago has many of its own districts, and District number 4 is a very interesting case. There are, I believe, Chicago is regarded as like a city where many African Americans live. There's a sizable Latino population in Chicago, and apparently the Latino people in Chicago generally live in 2 neighborhoods. There's like 2 big Latin neighborhoods in Chicago, but they're not together. So what you have in Chicago is sort of 2 separate neighborhoods like this. And because they are geographically separate, there has never been a Latino representative elected from the city of Chicago, even though there are enough Latin people there to elect a representative. if they happen to all be living together, but they're not. They're not all living next to each other. And instead, those people had always been divided into two larger districts, right? And there was a major court case about this that I believe went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And somebody from one of these neighborhoods said that my community, the Latino people of Chicago, our vote is being diluted. And this is a violation of the Voting Rights Act. So the Voting Rights Act was, there were several things called that, I guess. And as I say, I'm not an expert in this, but the intent was to protect people's votes. And it said it's illegal for anybody to do anything to prevent you from voting. And it's also illegal for someone to somehow mathematically diminish the value of your vote. So they're not allowed to just keep you from voting, and they're also not allowed to structure systems in a way which makes your vote less valuable than somebody else's. And the Latino community in these two areas said, our votes are being diluted by the system because if we were all together, we would be strong enough to have our own representative, but instead we are being sort of assimilated into these other two districts, and we can never get enough votes. And so, actually, the Supreme Court ruled that this was, in fact, a violation of the Voting Rights Act. And what they did was they created one district having this shape. It was these two things, and then a tiny corridor connecting them. This corridor went along a freeway. No people live on that little corridor there. And then, for the first time ever, Chicago elected a Latino representative based on this district. Yeah.
I find it a little bit confusing. So, this almost is, though, literally making it like about race.
Yeah. Right.
And, like, I just find that interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
You kind of, I think, have to decide either we're going to do that or not. But like, I don't know.
Yeah, I think to me, especially like as a sort of born and raised white New Englander, I was taught when I look at the world, I should never consider somebody's race in the way that I interact with them. I should treat everybody the same. And I was sort of that. I don't know if you were taught this way. I was kind of taught like to be sort of colorblind in that way. When I interact with somebody, I don't see color. I see you as a person, right? I think that goes so far, and that is helpful to some extent. But I also believe in some cases, it is appropriate to realize there are racial problems that we should fix. And you can't fix a racial problem by saying, I don't see color, I see everybody as a person, right? So I think, obviously all of these things are very controversial, but I would say my sort of takeaway about this is gerrymandering is fundamentally about race in the United States, and you can do this in a way, you can use gerrymandering to alleviate racial problems, and you can use gerrymandering to make things worse. And it's up to you. And I'm not, even this one is controversial. Even some Latino people said, do we really want to draw lines explicitly about race? It's not, I'm not trying to say that I'm not trying to give you my opinion as if it's a easy answer. Yeah. Yeah. It's very complicated, but that's what makes it interesting to me. I do believe, I don't know if you care, but I do believe that white people should sometimes care about other people's races, like when I interact with a person, I understand this now, at least I've changed my mind. When I interact with a person, I do care what race they are, just like I interact slightly differently if I'm talking to a man or a woman, just because there are different cultural positions that exist between different types of people in our society, and I think it's appropriate for me to respect that rather than trying to act as if that sort of thing doesn't exist. But anyway, that's just my own opinion. I can say things like this 5 minutes before the break, and nobody gets too angry. Anybody have any hot takes about this sort of thing? I don't know. I'm not trying to present myself as an expert, like I always say. All right. I had a couple more examples to do, but I think maybe we should just wait until next time and get everybody else on board with it too. So the homework problems will involve other things like this, and for that reason, I have, for your convenience, printed out the homework assignment. Everybody who is not here today is going to have to print it out themselves so they can draw on the pictures. I'm going to print them out for you because I know